All right, welcome back to the deep dive, everyone.
Ready for another one.
Always. Today, we're diving into something that's causing quite a stir, Saudi Arabia winning the bid to host the 2034 World Cup.
It's been all over the news, hasn't it?
It has. Big headlines, lots of opinions flying around. We've got a whole pile of news articles here.
From all sorts of places.
The New York Times, NPR, Global News, even The Guardian and the South China Morning Post. We really wanted to get a global perspective.
Definitely a global story.
And, this isn't just about soccer. It touches on economics, human rights, politics, the whole works.
Yeah, the stakes are high.
So buckle up, folks, because we're going deep on the controversy surrounding Saudi Arabia's World Cup win. We're dissecting the human rights concerns, the potential economic impacts, and what this means not just for soccer,
But for the whole future of these mega sporting events.
Exactly. Let's get started. First things first, FIFA made it official. Saudi Arabia is hosting the 2034 World Cup.
Big win for them.
But get this, they were the only country bidding.
Only one. You don't see that very often, do you?
Not at all. It kind of makes you wonder if it was even a real competition.
Well, there are reasons for that. Remember FIFA's continental rotation rule?
Right, the one that tries to spread out the hosting across different continents.
Exactly. And since the 2030 World Cup is going to be a three-continent affair, Spain, Portugal, Morocco, and opening games even in Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay.
Wow, that's spread out.
It kind of took most other contenders out of the running for 2034.
So basically the stars aligned for a solo Saudi bid.
You could say that. Some people aren't happy about it,
The
though.
lack of competition does raise some eyebrows, for sure. This will be the second time a Gulf state gets the World Cup, after Qatar in 2022. It's making some people think, is there a pattern here?
An interesting question, definitely. And it ties into this larger trend we're seeing. Saudi Arabia seems to be on a mission to become like a major player in global sports.
Totally. It's like they're making a statement. Think about it. They went and signed Cristiano Ronaldo for a crazy amount of money.
To play in their domestic league.
Exactly. And then there was the Love at Golf thing.
They really shook things up there.
And we've seen them hosting big boxing matches, tennis tournaments. It's like a whole strategy.
A very deliberate one, it seems.
So this World Cup bid, is it just another piece of the puzzle?
I'd say it fits right in. And it's all part of this bigger plan they've got, Vision 2030. It's led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Right, I've heard of that.
The goal is to, well, modernize the country, move their economy away from just oil, diversify.
Basically become global power player.
Exactly. And they're not messing around. Reports say they're willing to spend, get this, tens of billions of dollars on this World Cup.
Tens of billions, wow.
They're talking about 11 brand new stadiums, upgrading infrastructure, building tons of hotels. They're going all out.
That's a huge investment. Makes you wonder, what's the catch?
Well, that's where things get a bit, well, complicated. Because, not everyone's celebrating this win. The word sports watching keeps popping up.
I've heard that term too, but what does it actually mean?
In simple terms, it's using sports, the excitement of it all, to try and cover up or distract from maybe some less appealing things about a country.
Like their human rights record.
Exactly. And that's the big concern here.
Human rights groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, they're not holding back. They've issued warnings about the potential for exploitation and abuse, especially of migrant workers.
It's hard not to think about what happened in Qatar.
Exactly. There were reports of terrible working conditions, even deaths. FIFA got slammed for not doing enough to protect those workers.
And now there's a real fear it could happen all over again in Saudi Arabia.
Especially with the sheer scale of the construction they're planning.
It's a valid concern.
The Guardian even highlighted a case, a worker from Bangladesh. His name was Shahadat. He died in Saudi Arabia. He was struggling with debt, couldn't find work, and there were reports he couldn't even access health care because his residence permit had expired.
A tragic story. And a reminder that these events, they have real human consequences.
It makes you think, will things actually be different this time?
That's the question everyone's asking. Saudi Arabia keeps saying they've got new worker protections in place.
But is it enough?
The Guardian's investigation found that there's been a really high number of unexplained deaths among Bangladeshi workers in Saudi Arabia.
And that's before the World Cup construction has even really ramped up.
Right. So the skepticism is definitely there.
It's a dark side to this whole shiny, exciting World Cup bid.
It's a contrast, that's for sure.
On one hand, they're trying to project this image of progress and modernity.
But on the other, There are these very serious concerns about what's happening behind the scenes.
It's something we need to talk about.
Absolutely, we can't ignore it. And it raises another big question for me. Can Saudi Arabia actually pull this off? I mean, can they host this massive event, and at what cost?
Let's dig a little deeper into some of the challenges they're facing, maybe starting with the economic side of things. We're talking tens of billions of dollars. What kind of return are they expecting on that? And are there any big risks involved? Yeah, that's the thing. It's easy to get swept up in the excitement of a World Cup, all the glitz and glamour, but we have to look at the cold, hard facts too. Is this really a smart investment for them? Or could it turn into a financial nightmare?
It's a gamble, no doubt. But the potential benefits are there. You think about the tourism revenue, the boost they could get to their international image, and all that infrastructure they're building, it could create a lot of jobs.
And hopefully improve the country's overall economy.
Right. But then you have the flip side.
Like, what if the costs spiral out of control?
That happens all the time with these mega projects.
They go way over budget.
Yep. And then there's the question of sustainability. What happens to those shiny new stadiums after the World Cup is over? Do they sit empty? Do they become a drain on resources?
Yeah, white elephants. We've seen it before.
Exactly. And on top of that, we have to think about the global economy. Who knows what it'll be like in 10 years? What if there's another recession? Or an oil crisis? This whole project could backfire big time.
That's a lot to consider.
And it's something FIFA should be looking at very closely.
Well, didn't FIFA actually acknowledge some of these risks in their own evaluation report?
They did. They even mentioned potential unknowns and challenges.
But then they turned around and gave Saudi Arabia the highest score ever in a bid evaluation.
It's a head-scratcher, isn't it?
It makes you wonder if FIFA is really serious about responsible and sustainable development.
Or if they're just more interested in the money and the spectacle.
Because let's be honest, FIFA has taken a lot of heat over this decision. They've been accused of lacking transparency, of favoring Saudi Arabia, and basically putting profits over human rights.
And the criticism is coming from all sides, not just human rights groups.
Other countries, too.
Yeah, some fans and even athletes are speaking out. The whole thing just feels rushed, like it was decided behind closed doors without much thought for the ethical implications.
It would have been interesting to see a real competition, with multiple countries bidding.
Would Saudi Arabia still have won? Who knows?
That's the thing. We'll never know.
And that lack of transparency, it just feeds the suspicion that something's not quite right here.
It definitely raises questions about how FIFA operates, and it underscores the need for more accountability from them.
Transparency, too.
You mentioned other countries being critical. I remember reading about Norway and Switzerland being pretty vocal.
They didn't hold back.
They were questioning the whole bidding process, the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia, whether they could really deliver on their promises.
And it goes beyond just words. Some countries are even considering boycotting the 2034 World Cup.
Wow, a boycott.
That would be a huge statement.
It would send a really strong message to FIFA and Saudi Arabia.
And it could force them to start taking these criticisms more seriously.
It's interesting, though. Saudi Arabia seems to be trying to use this World Cup as a way to, kind of catch up in terms of global image and cultural influence. Like, they want to be seen as a modern, forward-thinking nation.
Yeah, that's definitely part of their strategy.
Yeah.
But it's a risky move.
Risky how?
Well, imagine if they don't address those human rights concerns. What if there are scandals during the tournament, worker protests, that sort of thing?
It could backfire big time.
Exactly. It would completely undermine their efforts to rebrand themselves. In fact, it could damage their reputation even further.
It's a delicate balancing act they're trying to pull off, trying to project this image of openness and reform, while at the same time, they're facing all this scrutiny for their human rights record, their restrictions on personal freedoms.
And the whole world's watching. This World Cup, it's going to be a big test for them, not just in terms of hosting the games, but whether they're truly committed to change.
And that brings us back to sports washing. Do you think these mega events can actually lead to meaningful change in a country? Or is it just a PR stunt?
That's the million-dollar question. It's complicated, really.
No easy answers.
Right. I mean, hosting a World Cup can bring a lot of attention and investment to a country. There's the potential for economic growth, job creation, improvements in infrastructure. But does it actually lead to deep, lasting societal change? Improvements in human rights, more democratic freedoms? That's a lot harder to say.
It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger wound. You cover it up, but you're not really addressing the root cause.
Exactly. Real change requires a commitment to systemic reform. tackling those underlying issues that are driving these human rights violations in the first place.
That's a much tougher task than building fancy stadiums and throwing a big party.
It needs political will, transparency, and a willingness to actually listen to the concerns of the international community.
It's not just about looking good on the surface.
Exactly.
Okay, we've talked about the economics, the politics, but what about the tournament itself? The 2034 World Cup is going to be the first one with 48 teams, a big jump from 32. How do you think that's going to affect the quality of play and the whole fan experience?
Well, it's a massive change, and there's bound to be some growing pains.
Some people are excited, of course. FIFA is arguing that it'll give more countries a chance to compete.
To be on the world stage.
Which sounds good in theory.
But are we going to see a drop in the overall quality of play? Will there be more mismatches, more blowouts? That's what some fans are worried about.
It's a valid concern, and logistically, it's a big challenge to accommodate 48 teams. You need more stadiums, more infrastructure, a much more complicated schedule. It's a huge undertaking.
And then there's the elephant in the room, the weather.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia gets scorching hot in the summer. It would be brutal for the players to compete in those conditions.
So they're probably going to have to move the tournament to the winter, like they did in Qatar.
Which means disrupting domestic league schedules all over the world.
Imagine the chaos. The European leagues would have to pause their seasons right in the middle.
And speaking of chaos, they're planning to use Neom as one of the host cities. It's supposed to be this futuristic mega city they're building. Except it doesn't actually exist yet.
So they're building a city from scratch, just for a few World Cup matches. That's ambitious, to say the least.
It seems a bit risky, too.
Can they actually build a fully functioning city in just over a decade? And what happens to it afterwards?
It's a big question mark.
It makes you wonder if they're not getting a little ahead of themselves.
Trying to make a statement.
Definitely a bold vision, that's for sure.
It's like a utopian city in the desert. But utopias, they usually come with a pretty hefty price tag.
That's true. And who usually ends up paying that price? The people who can least afford it. The workers who are building these mega projects. The local communities that get displaced. The environment that gets damaged in the process.
It makes you wonder, is there a different way to do these mega events? A way that's more sustainable, more fair, where human rights and the environment are truly prioritized?
That's the big challenge, isn't it? How do we find that balance? Because these events, they can be amazing. The cultural exchange, the economic opportunities, the global unity they can bring. But we can't ignore the dark side either. The exploitation, the environmental damage, the fact that so much wealth and power ends up concentrated in the hands of a few.
Tough questions. And it brings up another one for me. What's our role in all this as fans, as consumers? Do we have a responsibility to really look at these events critically? To ask the tough questions, to hold the organizers accountable?
Absolutely. We're not just passive observers. Our choices matter. Where we travel, which brands we support, how we engage with these events, it all adds up.
It's a powerful message. We have more influence than we think.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the potential downsides of this World Cup. But to be fair, there could be some positive outcomes too, right?
Of course. It's not all doom and gloom. If Saudi Arabia plays this right, this World Cup could be a real turning point for them.
A catalyst for positive change. Exactly. Think about it. This could generate a huge amount of national pride, unite the country. It could really push forward their efforts to diversify their economy, to move away from that dependence on oil. And it's a chance for them to showcase their culture, their history, to a global audience.
To show a different side of Saudi Arabia.
Exactly.
And let's not forget, they have made some reforms in recent years. Women are now allowed to drive. Some social restrictions have been loosened. They're investing a lot in education and technology.
It's a step in the right direction. And maybe, just maybe, this World Cup will push them even further.
Maybe it'll force them to improve their human rights record, to meet international standards, to show the world they're serious about change.
But they need to prove it with actions, not just words.
The world is watching. They'll be held accountable.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's a mixed bag of emotions, right? There's the potential for progress, for positive change, for a more open and inclusive Saudi Arabia. But those concerns about human rights, the environmental impact, the concentration of wealth and power, they're still there. It's a wait-and-see situation. What choices will Saudi Arabia make? How much pressure will the international community apply? And what role will fans around the world play? It all has to come together.
A lot of moving pieces. Well, this deep dive has certainly given us plenty to think about. We hope it sparks some thoughts for you too. What are your takeaways? What questions are you still wrestling with?
We encourage you to keep digging into this. Read the articles we mentioned, find different perspectives, and most importantly, come to your own conclusions.
Because this is about more than just soccer. It's about the future of a nation, the impact of these massive events on the global stage, and the role we all play in creating a world that's more just, more sustainable. That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic.